What's up everyone? So, put the moth trap out last night, 28th of September, definitely well into autumn now. The moth trap doesn't look too busy, but hopefully there might be some nice autumnal species in there, anything new for the year to show you. So anyway, let's get into it and see what moths we've got. So our first species is Cetaceous Hebrew character, a very common moth at this time of year. These actually fly in 2 or 3 broods throughout the year, from May all the way to October, but they're certainly most common from August to October, so in the latter half of the year. Now our second species is this moth. This is Lunar Underwing, and you may have seen on my previous video I caught Lunar Underwing, and it looks a little different to this one. This is because this one is the pale form. This one is the so-called buff form of the Lunar Underwing. Most commonly they are dark with paler veins, however the buff form is not rare, just not as common. Our third species is common wainscot. As its name suggests, it's common moth. These are double brooded, sometimes even triple brooded further south, so you can catch these from back in May all the way to the end of October. Again, I always find that they're most common late summer and early autumn. And our fourth species, on the same side of the egg box, is large yellow underwing. Perhaps the most common moth that you'll catch from the end of August to the beginning of September, which is their peak flight period. They are trailing off a bit now, don't catch as much of them, but they're still a very, very common moth. Our fifth species is a micro. This is the so-called garden rose tortrix, Eclaris variegana. It's a very common moth, often resembling a bird dropping with dark and pale coloration. This one is a pale individual, perhaps a little worn. A member of the tortrix family, with a characteristic resting shape. The sixth species of moth that we've got here is Snout. The second generation of these is still going. They can be caught well into October. Second generation lasts from the end of August to the middle of October. But Snout is a lovely moth. Often makes people laugh when they see it for the first time, with the comically long palps at the front of the head. And on the back we have our seventh species, which is the lovely Angle Shades. This is another moth that can be found from April all the way to November. There have even been records from it in the middle of winter, January and February. But they are most common, I find, at the end of May. There's a small peak and then a larger peak at the end of August throughout September. A beautiful moth, the Angle Shades, with a slightly crinkled resting posture. We have another Eclaris variegana, which is a variable moth as shown by the 2 individuals that I've shown you. Last one being pale, this one being more darker and strongly marked. They are extremely variable. There is a strong black and white one as well. And our 8th species is the lovely beaded chestnut. Now this is the lovely orangey brown form. There's also a different form in the trap which I will show. Again, another very variable moth, but easily identifiable by the small squashed elongated kidney mark and the smaller reniform stigma, which is usually the oval mark. I'll zoom in on those a little bit there. Now our next species, I think we're on our 8th species, is the absolutely gorgeous Canary-shouldered Thorn. I love the thorns, and the Canary-shouldered Thorn is absolutely gorgeous. Fluffy, bright yellow thorax, straw-coloured wings. What's not to love? It's a lovely, lovely moth. Now, this is our next species, and it's one that I don't think I've ever featured on this channel before. This is Chestnut. Now, it's a widespread moth, but it's not particularly common. I get it annually, but not in huge numbers, and it's not particularly an autumn moth either. It emerges, much like the herald, for example, in September, flies and can be seen into November, sometimes on mild nights throughout the winter, and then re-emerges then in larger numbers as the weather warms up at the end of February, throughout March, and perhaps into the first half of April. It's a small moth, a wingspan of only 3 centimetres, and it's got a rather truncated appearance. This one, however, is warming up its wings, so isn't sat in its normal resting posture. A lovely little moth. Now, the last bearded chestnut you saw was the lovely orange form. These two are sort of a greyish, greeny colour. Just shows how variable they are, but still they've got the thin, narrow kidney mark, which doesn't really look like a kidney anymore, and the thin, dashed reniform stigma. Or is it the orbicular stigma? They've also got a tiny sort of pink patch at the back of the thorax with 2 black dots. But they're a lovely, lovely moth with some lovely variation. The bearded chestnut. Common enough. Sometimes the most frequent moth in the trap at this time of year. And this bearded chestnut is a very strangely marked one. It has very little in the way of any wing markings. It is sat on top of another paler bearded chestnut, and we've got another one over there. I mean, you can just see by these 3 moths that they are amazingly variable. We've also got another, Eclaris variegana, much more strongly marked than the last 2, with a much more defined pale area and darker area. Looks more like a bird dropping, this one, but it's the same species as before. It's very, very strange how variable some species of moths can be. And down here we've got our 2 forms of the lunar underwing. We've got the darker, more typical form on the left, with those strong pale veins, and the paler, straw-coloured form on the right. But that will probably be about it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.